you don't have to be everybody's best friend, but you have to be approachable. And you also have to foster a willingness amongst your staff to have hard conversations. That's another part of our new directors collective that we teach at the CareNet conference is you kind of have to become a student of having hard conversations, radical candor.
Welcome to Lifeline for Leaders, a podcast created to strengthen and connect those serving in pregnancy care clinics and pro-life ministries. I'm Linda Thomas.
And I'm Kirk Thomas. Each week we sit down with leaders, ministry partners, authors, and experts who shape the pro-life landscape, sharing practical insights you can use right away and inspiring stories that remind you you're not walking this journey alone.
Our mission is to help you serve with confidence and resilience. This is your community, your support, your lifeline. Every leader will eventually hand the mission to someone else. The question is, will they be ready? Today, we're honored to welcome Monica Henderson. After practicing law for 10 years, Monica served as Executive Director of Beside You for Life in Louisville, Kentucky for 16 years. Today, she serves as a CareNet coach for policy and process, advising executive directors across the country on organizational leadership, board relations, human resources, and risk management. Throughout her career, Monica has become a trusted voice for pregnancy center leaders with her insights featured by local, national, and international media. With a resume like Monica's, there's no shortage of leadership topics we could explore today, and we'll touch on a few other things. But our main topic today is going to be something that every executive director will face eventually, and that's preparing a ministry for life beyond your leadership. So, Monica, welcome to Lifeline for Leaders.
Welcome aboard, Monica.
Thanks. Happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah.
Well, we will start our conversation. Kirk, if you'd lead us in prayer first.
I would love to, Linda. Thank you. Father, thank you for faithful leaders like Monica who invest in others. Give us wisdom to lead well, courage to make difficult decisions, and hearts that faithfully steward the mission you've entrusted us to. In Jesus' name, amen. Welcome, Monica. I was really looking forward to this interview. So it's been a while since we've talked, and I know you're enjoying retirement from the pregnancy care center. You're doing a lot of things still in the pro-life movement, but have kind of moved away from the executive director roles.
I've been retired for a full year. It's hard to believe, a little bit more than a year, but as Linda indicated, I practiced law for about 10 years. I clerked for a federal judge. I was in private practice at a large law firm here in Louisville. And then I decided it was time to get out of the law firm grind and get into the pro-life grind, and interviewed and landed the position as executive director. Back then it was called a Woman's Choice Resource Center in Nicole's Place. And we had our main pregnancy center was right across the street and down the street, one block from the private abortion clinic here in Louisville. And then about 12 blocks away, we had a life skills ministry called Nicole's Place. It was named after a client who had made a really big impact on some of the staff. And at that location, we actually operated 5 days a week, a life skills ministry. So once a woman came into the pregnancy center, she could go to the life skills ministry and work on her GED, take Bible study, parenting classes. We had on-site childcare. We had a computer lab. And then in 2017, we had a big capital campaign, and we decided that we would, let me back up. In 2010, we opened a satellite office that shared a wall with that abortion clinic. It was a very small optometry office, so we couldn't move our entire pregnancy care operation to that location. But we did open a satellite office because at that abortion clinic, they herded all the women in like cattle from 7:30 to 9, and then it shifted a little bit after COVID. No matter when your appointment was, you had to get there between 7:30 and 9 o'clock, basically. And so there was a very active clinic escort contingent there, a very active pro-life community of sidewalk counselors and protesters, as they would say. One time I counted, there was about 10 different versions of pro-life on the sidewalk outside that abortion clinic. And then in 2017, we decided we wanted to put the main pregnancy center and our life skills ministry under one roof. So we did a big campaign, and we relocated to the big building, which Kirk has been to, 4 stories, 22,000 square feet. We were able to put our main clinic and our life skills ministry under one roof. So everybody was together. And then for a few years, basically until Dobbs and that abortion clinic closed, we would stay open at that other location when the abortion clinic was open. So I was part of that team, led that team for 16 years, and then I decided it was time to hand it over.
As you've explained, you've led a larger pregnancy care center. You've been a coach for CareNet. If you could look back and give some advice to somebody who's starting out as an executive director, what would that be?
Well, one thing, I actually teach a pre-con seminar at CareNet for new executive directors. So this is actually something I've been pounding on for about 5 years now at that seminar, which is don't go it alone. I think that especially for me as an attorney coming in, I thought, I'm the boss, applesauce. And yes, the executive director is the boss, but you need friends because we've got plenty of enemies, right? And so my predecessor didn't really acclimate me to the national organizations. I mean, she in passing said, yeah, we're members of CareNet, we're members of Heartbeat, we're members of NIFLA. She kind of didn't really engage with the state coalition. And like my position back then, CareNet had center specialists, and there was actually a center specialist in the state of Kentucky. Some of your listeners may remember Sue Foltz, who did a lot of national trainings of boards and executive directors back in the day, but she was located in Lexington. And I found out that my colleague in Lexington had lunch with Sue every month. And I can't imagine what a blessing it would have been to have a senior, seasoned, former executive director, ministry leader, pastor's wife, just to have as a sounding board, every month, a safe person to talk to, and to not underestimate the value of your colleagues that are doing the same kind of work, maybe a little bit differently, maybe have different priorities. We kind of felt like we had a target on our back because we were next to the abortion clinic in Louisville, and all the other pregnancy centers in the state could not boast of that or benefited from not having that distraction and that sort of high pressure crucible situation going on. And so it kind of felt like they couldn't relate to us. We couldn't relate to them. But by no means was that an excuse or a reason not to connect with colleagues at all levels and just not to isolate yourself. I saw your all's episode with Robin Fuller, who's a good friend and who coached me. I hired her as a coach, but also did some of her succession planning cohorts. And I know that when you all interviewed her, she said you need somebody safe. You need a sounding board, and you need to be able to unload those burdens that you're carrying, but also get good ideas. Find out what other people are doing. So my advice to new people is don't try to go it alone. It's already lonely at the top, so to speak. And if you isolate yourself and think that that's your only option, it's kind of foolish.
Before we get into, you kind of alluded to some of the succession type issues that we will get into, and Robin certainly has a lot to say about that. But I wanted to ask you, Monica, as you coach around the country, what are the early signs that there's trouble brewing at a center?
Yeah, I think that if you feel uncomfortable going to your board meetings, if you don't have a good relationship with your board, that's a warning sign that something's not going well. I think that there's a risk that a lot of executive directors lack a lot of self-awareness. I know I did, and I think that it's a good practice, good hygiene, leadership hygiene, maybe to find some people that can be really honest with you and tell you what your weaknesses are. When I interview candidates for any job, one of the questions I always ask is, if I lined up all your friends and family in a room and I asked you to fill in this blank, what would they say? Boy, I love Kirk, but one thing that drives me crazy about him is blank.
Can I answer that?
Yes, you're welcome, Linda. Feel free to chime right in.
We've only got 20 minutes, so
and then we'll reverse it.
Kidding,
and I'll ask Linda if I lined up all your family and friends, and I said,
I don't have anything terrible to say about Linda. She's wonderful in all areas.
He's such a better person than I am.
But I think it's a good check on ourselves to say what is it about me that drives people crazy?
Yeah, exactly.
Or there's other ways you can get to it, but I had to hear a lot of people say to me over and over again that I'm intimidating, or that I had a staff person say, that I would always say no to their ideas. And I was like, I don't really feel like I'm a negative person, but I'm wired to see the glass half empty, you
Mm.
know? And so I can come across as discouraging, or I can come across as intimidating, because my sort of from shoot from the hip propensity is to see the negative and to want to say no. But what I learned was I'm actually saying, slow down, I need time to process this. Like, when you bring all your enthusiasm for this idea to me, because you've been ruminating on it for 2 weeks before you bring it to me, and it's brand new to me, my gut instinct is, whoa, slow down there, and that can come across as no, intimidating, negative, not supportive. But what I really need is time to process and to get on board with you. So, like, I had to learn that about myself and also communicate it to other people. So I think one of the warning signs is if people are telling you, hey, you've got this problem, or I can't talk to you, or I can't bring my ideas to you, then you need to kind of take a step back and self-assess and kind of do a gut check and a self-assessment of what your weaknesses and where you lack self-awareness and how you come across to people. And then, of course, like, another early sign is like disgruntled staff. You got to be aware of what's going on in your staff and take their temperature and be able to communicate and connect with them in a way that kind of lets you know, oh, something's not right here.
So if you leave that unchecked, what kind of happens beneath the surface and then eventually does surface?
Yeah, I think that if you lack self-awareness and you don't know how you connect and relate to people or attune to your staff, then eventually it's going to lead to a mutiny. You don't have to be everybody's best friend, but you have to be approachable. And you also have to foster a willingness amongst your staff to have hard conversations. That's another part of our new directors collective that we teach at the CareNet conference is you kind of have to become a student of having hard conversations, radical candor, being able to kind of ferret out what the real problem is, and just practice that. And that it's hard. Like, I always tell people this too. I say, everybody says, I don't like conflict. I don't like conflict. And for some reason, they think that gives them a pass not to ever have conflict. Just because you make that declaration, well, I don't like confrontation. Too bad. So sad. The people part is the hardest part. You have to get over that fear. The only people that like conflict are like MMA fighters, and it's because they get paid to do it, right?
Right.
So you have to kind of get over this belief amongst Christians. Christians don't, we just clutch our pearls and say, oh, bless her heart, and they don't have confrontation. They don't have conflict. They're not willing to say the hard thing. But clarity is kindness. I think maybe Brene Brown said that. I don't know. Somebody did. Clarity is kindness. And sometimes you have to have hard conversations. And if you foster that amongst your team, a willingness, and even practice it and give trainings about habit. I know that Robin does a training on conflict, and she's been doing it at the conferences for several years, courageous conflict. And pregnancy center people need to be able to have courageous conflict.
Definitely. Definitely. So let's kind of go back to that day that you just started to decide that maybe I need to step away from the role as an executive director beside you. What were you thinking then? And I mean, how just kind of lead us through how that happened. And
It wasn't a day. I think it was more of a process and just kind of a revelation over time. And I think it might have started when two of my key people, the two first strong leaders that I hired. One, I was hired in January, and I hired my first clinic director in April of that year. And then a year later, I had to hire the development director. And the three of us served, I guess, nonstop together, attached at the hip for about 12 years. And they both kind of gave their notice that they were going to retire about the same time. And that's the first time I went through Robin's succession planning cohort. And it wasn't for my succession planning, it was for them. It was to kind of process their leaving and what would be the best thing for me to do in connection with replacing them. And so we joked around. We always joked around. 3 people total. Me, the clinic director, well, 4. Me, the clinic director, the development director, and our bookkeeper all had a suicide pact. It was, if you leave, I leave. It didn't really come to fruition, but their leaving kind of started, kind of put the seed in my mind. Like, I need to plan this well. I don't need to just hit the eject button. And then we were going through some strategic planning a couple of years later, and probably about a year later, and I told the strategic planning committee, I said, part of the strategic plan needs to include the realization that I am stepping down in the next 3 to 5 years. And the person who modeled that for me was actually our staff counselor. We had a counselor. He was a pastoral counselor. He taught our parenting class. He did one-on-one counseling with clients, and he modeled that. He gave me clear notice. I'm going to step down in 5 years, 4 years, 3 years. He stuck to his plan. And so I wanted to broadcast it to the board. I'm probably going to retire in the next 3 to 5 years. And they knew it was coming. And then I'm sorry to say, I probably got a little burned out. I probably got a little, even though I knew it was on the horizon, I think I let myself get a little bit burned out. And so it became more of a 3-year than a 5-year horizon. And I asked, it was time for me to have a sabbatical. And I wrote a probably pretty serious, 3-page letter of not just it wasn't really my struggles personally. It was like, these are the big picture items I see going on in the pregnancy care movement that you all need to be cognizant of. And maybe when I come back from my sabbatical, I'll be re-energized and ready to go another 5 years, or God will give me a clear sign that it is time for me to go. And so when I came back from sabbatical, I told them it was time for me to go. But I gave them a very long, I gave them about a 9-month notice to start the whole more intensive succession planning process.
Well, succession planning is such an important topic that leaders should think about, but they don't. Why do you think that's such a hard topic to bring up and start,
Yeah,
Monica?
I think one reason is because in some people's minds, I'm going to be here forever, especially founders. I think founders have a really hard time of thinking about letting go of their ministry. Another aspect of the non-succession planning thing is that I think there's a little bit of a disconnect between executive leaders and their boards. If boards say to the executive director, we need to talk about succession planning, it's going to make the leader nervous, like, oh no, what did I do wrong? And if an executive director goes to the board too soon and the board's really not geared up for it, they might think, oh, she doesn't really mean it. He's going to stay. We just need to give him more money, and there's just kind of a sort of a lack of reality on both sides. And then I think that it just gets put off, the tyranny of the urgent, the day-to-day operations. Succession is such a far off concept. It's hard enough to do long-term planning in general, but to think for this nebulous future thing that nobody really has a date for yet, and it's just a kick the can down the road sort of thing. And people don't really see it as protecting the ministry, because how many times have you seen a leader get burned out and leave, or maybe hit the eject button with little or no notice, and the center is there holding the bag, trying to wonder how they're going to keep the doors open. There's just so many ways the handoff can go wrong if you don't plan for it. So, I'm definitely in the Robin Fuller succession plan is worth it camp.
Transitioning, moving the leadership to Nikki beside you. How involved were you in finding her and then training her and bringing her up to speed? For other centers that are maybe going through this, that you could give them maybe a template to follow.
Yeah, some people might think that because Nikki was an internal hire that she was tapped and then just trained, but actually Nikki competed for the job. We hired a local consulting firm that does a lot of nonprofit consulting, and one of their helps is succession planning and searches. And so we hired this local group, Ashley Roundtree, and worked with them to kind of set the parameters of what the new executive director should look like. And then they handled the initial screening. So they posted the job. They, rattled the shrubs trying to, we posted it everywhere we could think of, mostly regionally. We didn't do a serious national search other than to post it with CareNet and Heartbeat. But we reached out to a lot of different networks. I encouraged them to post it at seminaries because there's plenty of people in leadership that used to be pastors or, want to get into ministry, but maybe not church ministry. And they had about, I want to say they had about a dozen applicants. They phone screened most of them. They got it down to 4, and they did initial interviews with 4, and then they narrowed it down to the 2 finalists. And then they had a second round of interviews, and Nikki competed head to head with the other candidate. And then for the transition, now let me back up. When I knew Nikki was interested, I started mentoring her in a different way than I had previously. Nikki had been with the ministry for several years. She came in as an assistant. Well, first of all, she went through our post-abortion ministry and volunteered with Forgiven and Set Free classes. Then she joined our development team. And then she moved into the pregnancy center as an advocate. And then she moved into helping us launch our mobile ministry and was promoted up through the pregnancy center and became director of the pregnancy center before. She was just one of the staff. I said, if I retire, are you interested? And she said, yes. So my mentoring of Nikki actually happened before she ever applied for the job. And then after she was hired, we continued on. Like I wrote about a 50-page executive director's brain dump, like a how-to manual, like all the major areas of the ministry that I had my hand on. The table of contents is about 2 pages long. Maybe it's just a full page. But anyway, every area of the ministry and kind of big picture, but also some small stuff too. And so she has that manual, but then she also could pick my brain and talk to me. And I was kind of on call for about 6 or 8 weeks, literally under contract. And then she also has access to me now. Like we have lunch, maybe once a month. We text back and forth. And then she could literally reach out to me just like any executive director could through the CareNet umbrella. I'm not paid by Beside You to mentor her, to coach her, but she has that same access to me that every other executive director does.
So what are some of the biggest mistakes leaders make when they're planning their succession?
I think this can work and it can also be a disaster. And that is thinking that they have someone inside who might actually not be the right person. I felt pretty good that Nikki could do the job, but it was comforting to me to have this outside team screen her, recognize that she was qualified, have her go through the interview process, and compete head to head with external candidates and another internal candidate. And I think that that's a good exercise because I think that especially if there's any question or uncertainty about an internal candidate, that it's a good job to have them screened in competition with external candidates. Internal candidates can be too comfortable or, fall into the same patterns that the old leadership had and maybe even be too dependent on the former executive director. I also think that it's good for the former executive director to get out of the way. I've heard too many, nightmare stories of founders or former executive directors who linger or stay on the board and don't give the new executive director free rein, and unleash them to do their own leadership. They, stick their thumb on it and they have too much influence on the board as the founder or a prior executive director. And that can be very difficult for the new executive director and really not of great benefit to the ministry.
Monica, if you walked into a ministry tomorrow, maybe you've already done this and seen some things that kind of tipped you off that they weren't really prepared for succession. Are there giveaways to that?
I don't know that I could tell if I walked in off the street. And the reason is because I think just like family members can look all clean and tidy and they behind a mask and they put their best foot forward, it might be hard unless you were there for a couple of weeks and almost did like a 360 review or, talk to some of the key leaders, the development director, the clinic, client services director, and found out, hey, how's the transition gone in these last few weeks and really had a frank discussion with them. I don't think it would be really obvious to begin with. I think a lot of pregnancy centers do a good job of making it work. And they could hold it together while their secret shopper came in. And then it wouldn't be until weeks later that you knew, oh, this person was disgruntled about the hire or they thought, one of the things with Nikki that felt comfortable with our consultants about was if an internal candidate did not get the job, the consultant was going to sit down with that internal candidate and say, this is where you were weak. This is where you can build on your strengths, fill in the gaps so that the next time a leadership position opens up, you will be more qualified. And they were willing to walk through that process with her. But what if there's a ministry that had an internal candidate who didn't get the job and everybody on the team thought they were going to get it and new guy got it and people are just gruntled?
Right.
That's probably not going to come out right away. It's going to take some time to get to the hurt feelings and the disappointment that comes with your candidate not getting the job.
If an executive director that's listening to this is thinking, okay, about 5 years, I'm thinking about, moving away from the ministry, what would you recommend to them right then and there that they should start thinking about, planning about? I mean, is there anything advice you could give that leader?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that a leader who's thinking about leaving should do, if they have not already done so, and there's no reason not to start, even if they're not if they have no vision for leaving, is to write their knowledge transfer document. They need to do a brain dump. I call it an owner's manual, but basically, like, scope out your year. What does your calendar look like? And then all the areas of ministry that you're responsible for, the administrative stuff, the IT, the building maintenance, the clinic operations, the fundraising, the personnel, every aspect of the ministry that the executive director is responsible for. You could even start with your job description. Go through your job description and make a table of contents entry for every major part of your responsibilities on your job description, and make sure that you've got a how-to manual like this. I'm responsible for marketing. This is what our marketing looks like. I'm responsible for fundraising. This is what our fundraising looks like. Everything from the name of your fundraising database, how you log into it, who your sales rep is, who your insurance provider is, like what kind of insurance you get, the trainings that you do with your staff, how frequent, what is your communication rhythm, your communication rhythm with your board chair, communication rhythm with the board, communication rhythm with the staff meetings, every aspect. Just start with an outline or, like I said, your job description, and start writing a narrative. It can be bullet points, it can be paragraphs, whatever. Your how-to manual. National organizations, state coalitions, internal and external relationships, every aspect of your job, get it down in an owner's manual.
Yeah.
And then if you get it to a point where you like it, then go back every 6 months and update it. Something new's happened, you got a new vendor, whatever it is, just update it every 6 months so that if you're hit by a bus, it's there for the emergency operations. But if there's an orderly succession plan and hiring process for your successor, it's a gift that you hand off at your retirement party.
So you had mentioned real quick that you had worked with Robin on the succession planning. I mean, would you recommend an executive director reaching out to a coach or, somebody like Robin to start this process?
Yeah, the great thing about Robin's succession planning cohort, it runs about 6 months, and it's a mix of maybe 6 to 8 leaders. Most of them are pregnancy center leaders. And it's all over the map. It was people like me who were just thinking about it. And I remember one leader, she had her successor picked out, and she was just working through making sure that she had all the I's dotted and the T's crossed, and dealing with the emotional part of leaving, because I think she had been at her center like 30 years, and she was actually in the cohort through her transition starting, like her handing it over. So you get a lot of good thoughts from colleagues, and Robin's been at it long enough. She's pretty methodical in making sure that all the bases are covered.
Great advice.
You have anything else, Kirk?
I just want to say, it was a blessing to be a partner to beside you and be in a relationship with you when you were at the center. So I want to thank you for everything you've done to protect and save lives and everything that you continue to do. So will we see you in Houston at the CareNet conference?
Yes, I will be in Houston teaching that new directors collective, we call it, on day one, and I'll I'll swagger through the exhibit space and say hello to you there like
All
I usually
right.
do.
All right. So
That would great.
definitely.
Well, Monica, thank you so much. I have one more question for
Sure.
you. As always, we leave our listeners with one practical wisdom or piece of encouragement that you could offer them that they could take with them right away. What would that be?
Well, probably a combination of two things I've already said, just to reiterate. You're not alone, but make sure that you reach out to those people who are supporting and supportive of you. Just don't isolate. Definitely don't isolate. It's hard enough to think that you are alone. So definitely and definitely start your owner's manual. Do not delay. Get everybody on your staff to work on their owner's manual so that they can hand it off to their successor because they won't be in that job forever either.
That's
Such
great
great
advice.
advice.
Thank you so much, Monica, for investing in our listeners today. We appreciate you sharing your wisdom and leadership with us. And listeners, keep leading with courage and compassion.
Thanks for joining us today on Lifeline for Leaders. If today's episode was meaningful, feel free to share it with someone who might benefit. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a conversation.
Remember, you don't have to walk this mission alone. We're honored to walk alongside you.
See you next time.